alumna from the London School of Economics. It's really fantastic to have you here. I also want to extend a special welcome to members of Alcoa's Women's Network who are in our audience this evening. Alcoa, the world's leading producer of aluminum and a great innovator, first came to our attention in relation to this event because Alcoa's president and chief executive officer, Mr. Klaus Kreinfeld, was an early champion of Rita's new book. In fact, his endorsement appears on the book's back cover. We have since discovered that Alcoa has a women's network dedicated to developing and advancing women leaders. We were thrilled to learn that a company with a strong connection to this event has a women's group whose mission is ultimately our own. From the perspective of a Barnard alumna, for whom Barnard will always be a point of reference, I guess the best way and the most distinct way to describe Rita McGrath's career is that she crossed the street. And indeed, since 1993, when Rita first joined the faculty of Columbia Business School, she has spent much time in business school's lecture halls across the street from Barnard's campus. But at least during the time I was a student here in the 80s, the phrase across the street was more than just a geographic marker. Back then, across the street was used as a kind of shorthand for everything that differentiated Barnard from the rest of the university. A phrase of enormous versatility that also, of course, referred to everything which united us with the university, including the expansive resources we could use in pursuing our own academic paths. From a Barnard alum's perspective, Rita Gunther McGrath is a very strong link between Barnard College and the goings-on on the other side of Broadway. From anyone's perspective, she is an expert and a business strategist of immense prestige, both in the United States and abroad. Rita Gunther McGrath is an associate professor at Columbia Business School, where she directs several educational programs for senior executives. Rita was recently named one of the 50 top business professors in 2013 by MBA Rankingsnet. She has also been listed as one of the top 10 business school professors to follow on Twitter. Her advice is sought after by both Global 1000 icons and smaller startups. As a consultant to senior leadership teams, her clients include General Electric, Coca-Cola Enterprises, Allianz Boots, and the World Economic Forum. She was recognized as one of the top 20 management thinkers by Global Management Award Thinkers 50 in 2011, and in 2009 she was inducted as a fellow of the Strategic Management Society, an honor accorded to those who have a significant impact on the field. Although Rita will be speaking about her new book, she has co-authored 3 other highly acclaimed books on the topics of innovation, entrepreneurial management, and growth. She is often cited in the press, maintains an active blog on a variety of topics, including business, startups, and entrepreneurship, and is featured as a discussion leader in Harvard Business Online. Her academic publications have appeared in leading management journals, and she has won numerous awards for excellence in scholarship. Prior to life in academia, Rita was an entrepreneur herself and founded 2 startups. Her PhD is from Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. Now about the end of competitive advantage, how to keep your strategy moving as fast as the business. The book came out last month and promptly became one of the top 10 best-selling business books for the month of June. One reviewer writes that her book is irrefutably argued and offers immediate, actionable solutions. Another reviewer simply called Rita's book unique among its peers. This evening, Rita has graciously accepted our invitation to speak before BEnet's audience after having just returned from Europe and a whirlwind book tour. As a Barnard alum, I thank you, Rita, for crossing the street and agreeing to discuss with us your book and presenting us with a new playbook for business strategy. We are honored to welcome you and look forward to what I'm sure will be a compelling presentation and a very lively evening. Thank you.
That was lovely, thank you very much. But as any Barnard alum knows, you never really leave.
So it's a real pleasure to be here. This is a room that is so full of sort of history and meaning. If you told me some years ago that I'd actually be the one speaking here, I would have raised a quizzical eyebrow and wondered about that. But it is a real pleasure to be back at Barnard and to be invited to speak about the book. It's a new topic. We don't have a sort of a roving mic, so forgive me if I kind of have to be tethered here with the noise of the air conditioning. You'll never hear me if I try to just shout. And the book has been a long time in coming, and the motivation for the book was, if you think about the field of strategy, For years, the goal of strategy has been to find this elusive thing called a sustainable competitive advantage. And my colleagues, who write about this stuff, all say, well, what you want is an advantage that should last for a long, long time. And what I found as I worked with companies, as I did my own research, as I kind of explored the territory of business, is that that set of conditions applies, but in fewer and fewer parts of our economy. And what instead we're seeing is companies that are having to find short-lived advantages, capitalize on them quickly, and then extract the resources from them and move on when the advantage is exhausted. And I think it really causes us to have to think very, very differently about what we mean when we think about strategy. So I thought it would be interesting to illustrate this with a story. The story involves two photography companies, Fujifilm of Japan and Kodak of the United States. Fuji had a very tough start in life. They were kind of kicked out of their parent firm, which was a movie film company, and told they had to get their act together and learn to perform on their own, which eventually they did. And by the time Japanese firms became resurgent global players in the 1970s and 80s, Fuji had become a globally branded firm. They competed with Kodak on a lot of different dimensions, and they were widely regarded as a very competent technical player. Now, back in 1973, a pair of oil and gas billionaires, the Hunt brothers, decided to try to hedge their positions in oil and gas trading by trying to corner the world's market for silver. Americans aren't allowed to buy actual gold, so they decided to do the next best thing and buy silver. When this scheme started in 1973, the price of silver was approximately 50 cents an ounce. By the time it kind of came to light in 1979, the price of silver had shot up to close to $50 an ounce, and the Hunt brothers reportedly controlled half the world's available supply. And all the photography companies freaked out. They said, my God, not only is this raw material we depend on becoming much more expensive than we had thought, but we may not even be able to get our hands on enough of it to meet our production goals. Well, we all know what happened, those of us who followed things at the time. The scheme fell apart. By March of 1980, it was all over. The price of silver went back to its normal levels, and every photography company on the planet, except one, said, wow, thank God that's over. Back to business as usual, with a business model for photography and film that had really not changed in decades and decades. The one that didn't quite take this so easily was Fuji. They had a brand new CEO, and this experience really shook him up. His name was Minoru Onishi, and he said, if this kind of thing happened once, it could happen again, and we are vulnerable. I need to really give this some thought. His unease crystallized in 1984 with Sony's introduction of the very first all-digital camera, the Mavica, a camera that could take pictures without film. And Onishi was interviewed later, and he said, at that moment, it became absolutely clear to me that film-free photography was not only possible, but entirely probable, that this was going to go digital. And not only that, but that digitization was going to affect many of the fields that we touched. And what he began to do was a decades-long drive to pull resources out of film and the old-style photography business model and pour it into new areas. So both digital technologies for picture making, but also he's in cosmetics. They got into office workflows. They got into healthcare. So different industries, different ways of competing. Today, Fuji employs about 81,000 people. Their revenues last year were $27 billion with a B dollars. They're number 400 on Fortune's list of the top 1,000 corporations. Kodak is literally blowing up its factories because it can't afford to pay the real estate taxes on them. That's how badly off the company is. And I think it's an interesting example because it didn't have to be that way. Kodak had all the technology it needed. In fact, they invented digital photography. Kodak had smart people. Kodak had all the talent. Kodak had the brand. I mean, there was a time back in the 1980s when the Kodak brand was one of the 10 most valuable brands in the world. So I think to me, this story really exemplifies the problem that I write about in the book, which is if you rest too long on a competitive advantage, even one that's lasted a long time, it is entirely possible that you get trapped. And I think the book's really about what do you do strategically to avoid that fate, or what do you do strategically to be proactive about not having that happen to you. Because I think a lot of the core assumptions that we make in strategy, and I'll talk business for a minute, but strategy, are really called into question by this idea. So one of the core assumptions in strategy is the most significant competitor you'll face is other companies in your industry. And yet, today, what we're seeing now is the most significant competitor you'll face is probably some other industry coming after some pool of resource that you need. For example, in last year, a Wall Street Journal reporter was looking at the growth rates of various segments of the economy from 2007, when the iPhone and Android were first introduced and commercialized, to 2012. Family spending, household spending on cell phones and telecommunications in general, up by 11%. What was down? Spending on apparel, spending on restaurants, spending on vacations, spending on cars. So if you're doing a traditional strategy analysis and you run a clothing shop, let's say, and you're comparing yourself to other clothing shops, you're actually missing the story completely. And even though for years we've talked about substitutes in strategy, it's never been kind of core to the idea. It's been sort of a central theme, but not one that we've really taken seriously. So I think we need a different vantage point, a really different place to begin looking at strategy. So in the book, I talk about what I call a new playbook for what we need to do with strategy, right? And how do firms need to operate differently if they're really going to be effective competitors in this very dynamic set of environments. So the first thing that we see is a departure from the world of what we in academia would call punctuated equilibrium. What that means in plain English is all hell breaks loose, right? Then things kind of settle down. Then you have a period of stability until the next sort of disruption, and then you've got a period of stability. The assumption being that the periods of stability are relatively long and the periods of kind of change and turmoil are relatively short. What we're seeing now in more and more parts of the economy is that just isn't the model, that there's constant kind of turbulence. And so what I see in firms that are able to cope with that is they never let themselves get too settled. They're continuously reconfiguring. They're always kind of moving their structures a little bit, moving people around a little bit, testing the waters, making exploratory investments, doing some experimentation. Now, what's interesting about this is because they're doing a lot of this on a small scale, on an ongoing basis, over time, it adds up to big changes. But you don't have this kind of wrenching, fire the left-hand side of the building, let's completely restructure. You don't tend to see that. What you tend to see is more of this sort of gradual shifting and moving into new spaces in an almost fluid, rhythmic kind of way. I call it continuous reconfiguration. The next thing that you tend to see in companies that are successful at competing this way is what I call healthy or constructive disengagement. If you think about the life cycle of a competitive advantage, right? You have a period of time in which you conceive it, and that's sort of the entrepreneurial innovation part of the thing. You have the period of time in which you build it up, that's ramping it up. Then you have this lovely period of exploitation, but what happens next? Competitors come after you, somebody matches, technology changes, you realize your phone books, and eventually it's going away. You have a period of erosion. And the question then is, how do you disengage? How do you pull resources out of that fading advantage, the same way Fuji did, to invest it in something that's new? And most companies do this at some point, but they do it with great pain after they've been forced against the wall and it's obvious to everybody there's problems. And then we finally get around to making the tough decision. My argument is, if you have a company that's being proactive, you would make those decisions much more readily, you'd make them faster, you'd make them more quickly, and they wouldn't be nearly so painful. You'd be prepared. So healthy disengagement. The third thing is getting control over the resource flows in your organization. So let's take a hypothetical. Let's say you're Mr. Walkman at Sony. You run the Walkman division. And what you're great at is getting maximum power out of AA batteries, putting little media that contain albums worth of content inside these devices that have little spinning motors and whirring things so that you get perfect fidelity out of this music player, right? And that's what you have built your career on. Now let's say somebody comes to you and says, guess what? We need to be prepared for a future without AA batteries. Gone. Without media on content. It's all going to be digital, and it won't be by the album, by the way, it'll be by the song, and it'll be solid state. And there'll be thousands of these songs stored anywhere a person wants to listen to them. And you're Mr. Walkman at Sony. How does this make you feel? This is scary stuff, right? So of course you're going to say, oh, I embrace that with open arms. Let me reach into my wallet and fund that project. No. So here's the thing. If you really want to be successful at moving from advantage to advantage, you need to figure out how to get resources away from the people that control today's powerful business. And that's tricky, because in a lot of organizations, people in power are the people that run big, successful businesses, and they think they should have the say about how that cash gets spent. When in reality, what you need to be doing is taking the cash out of things that are maturing and putting it into something that's new. So deft resource allocation, resources allocated somewhere other than the heads of powerful businesses. When we talk about entrepreneurship, I think companies that are successful in the future are going to develop real proficiency at innovation. Today, in most organizations, innovation is kind of haphazard. Some powerful guy says, damn it, we need more innovation around here. And you, and you, and you, go be an innovation team. Come to work in painter pants and learn creativity and stuff. Seriously, it's amazing when you hear the conversations. And so they do this for a while, and it goes on, and eventually maybe they get some traction, they start to learn. And then the champion changes, the company hits a shortfall somewhere else in its budget, the champion loses his job or moves on or gets bored or retires, and the whole thing kind of fades away, only to emerge 12 months later when someone else says we need more innovation around here. What I'm going to argue instead we're looking for is a systematic process. It has a governance structure. It has a funding mechanism. It has people who are trained to do this stuff. It has actual procedures that you follow. And it amazes me, you would never as an organization leave your quality process, your supply chain process, your merchandising process. You wouldn't leave any of those important things to somebody to just make up as they go along, and yet when it comes to innovation, we do that all the time. And so I think we will need to see this real proficiency of innovation to be built up. I think we're also going to see leaders increasingly using a discovery-driven rather than a plan-to-be-right mindset. So here are two phrases that I would really watch out for. When the leader says, I don't want any surprises. Don't bring me surprises. And don't bring me a problem unless you have a solution. If you have a leader saying those things, are they going to get unfiltered information? Are they going to find out what's really going on? No. And if people can't bring them problems without knowing what the solution is, the only problems you're ever going to see are very incremental. You're not going to get the big sort of, this is going to change the future of our trajectory kind of problems. So leaders really need to be open to getting really concrete data and really good facts. An interesting example of this is Alan Mulally, who was the CEO who took over at Ford in 2006. He came over from Boeing. And he walks into the executive parking garage, his first day at work, and looks around. This is Ford now, the Ford Motor Company. He looks around the executive parking garage. There are no Fords in the executive parking garage. There's not a single Ford car. This is not a good sign. Just in case you were wondering, this is not a good thing. And Mulally was famous for his management style, which was to have a lot of metrics. Everybody has metrics they're trying to drive, and they're color-coded. So there's green, which is good, terrific. There's yellow, which is some warnings. There's orange, which is maybe not so great. And then there's red, which is, oh, this is a problem, right? Now, the year he came into the company, Ford was on track to lose $6 billion with a B. I mean, that's a lot of money even for a great big car company. So they're on track to lose $6 billion. He comes into his first day's management meeting. Everybody puts out their numbers, and it's all green. It looks like a lawn. It's beautiful. And Mullally's looking at him and he's going, guys, we're on track to lose $6 billion and you're telling me there are no problems? How can that be? And he used a phrase that I really think is wonderful. He said, you can't manage a secret. You have to be able to get the data on the table and confront it honestly. You can't manage a secret. Well, this went on for a couple of meetings, and then finally one of his guys cracked, a guy named Mike Fielding. And Mike finally said, all right, I'm having this problem with launching this new truck, and here's all the issues, and laid it all out. And the room gets really quiet. And they're all kind of looking at him like, Mike, it's been great knowing you, you know. Because the culture in the company up to that point was you didn't reveal your problems. You kept them to yourself. You didn't, you know, show the truth. You know what Mullally did? And as I said, the room's quiet now. Everybody's looking at him. He gets up. He said, that's what we need. He said, and that was a real breakthrough. He said, it was great, but it was also kind of terrifying because he comes in the next meeting and he said, it's like a rainbow in there. I mean, there's just all kinds of problems. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But I'm going to argue that's more and more the kind of leadership we need. Very honest, very candid, willing to hear bad news, let it travel fast. That's what we need. Last thing is quite germane to what we're here to talk about, which is I think we're going to start seeing real differences in how people build their careers. We're going to be seeing real differences in how people think about what their careers are. It's going to be much more about what a colleague of mine calls tours of duty, or gigs, some people call it. You know, so you're going to find an opportunity. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to then move on to the next opportunity. That may be in one company, it may be in multiple companies, but it's going to be a really different way of building a career than previous generations may have thought of. So I'll illustrate this with the story of a young acquaintance of mine who works for a consulting firm, and her practice managers gave her an assignment. She was going to do this analysis of a particular market segment and see what it was. And they knew from experience that this would take her about 2 months. It had always taken 2 months to do that kind of work before. She comes back in a week with it done. There's a spot right there if you want to sit here. She comes back in a week with it done, and her supervisors are astonished. They're like, how did you do that? You know? And she said, oh, well, you know, I have my friend John. He's really good at statistics, so he helped me with that part. And I have another friend who works for, you know, this marketing firm, and she's great at market sizing, so she helped me with that piece. She mobilized this virtual network of about 10 people who all pitched in their special skills and helped her get her job done. Some of those people worked for competing companies. Isn't that interesting? And to me, that's the way more and more work is going to get done. People will build these networks, and you know what? The networks are probably going to be more durable than the companies that they're associated with. And I think that's a really just interesting difference in how people get work done today. You know, if you look at how different generations work, it's quite intriguing. And so when I get a lot of whining from older managers about millennials, you know, and what am I supposed to do with them and blah, blah, blah. And I actually think some of the behavior that these guys are interpreting negatively, they're actually misinterpreting them. Like the deal when I went to work, and I used to work for government, was you spent your first 2 years, you know, communing with the copy machine, and then eventually you got to do something kind of interesting, and then maybe after you'd proven your loyalty, you know, you got to get put on a team. That's not going to cut it anymore. People need to be building skill all the time, and they need to start right from the minute they get started. And if you don't keep doing that, you become less valuable, and it becomes less affordable to get a job. So when you think about what it all means for individuals, what it all means for careers, I think in more and more parts of the economy, we're going from a world of organizational systems that kind of design things to a world of individual skills. We're going from a world where, you know, you have these stable career paths, and okay, at 18 months, here's where you're going to be, and at 27 months here, and then you're going to meet that threshold. I don't see so much of that anymore. Instead, what you've got is this series of engagements, a series of gigs. You're going to go from a world where it's a lot about hierarchies and teams and where you are, to a world of individual superstars making the difference. Increasingly, your competitive advantage is going to be this sort of person who has an insight or who does something that's really unique. You're going to go from relatively infrequent job hunting. In fact, I was giving this book talk in, let's say it was Houston, and one of the guys came up to me and he said, you have completely changed my mind. I said, what? He said, up to today, I always thought that people who had like lots of jobs on their resumes had a problem. Can't you hold down a job? You know, and people find out about you and you have to move on. What is this? He said, now I'm realizing, no, what they're doing is building skills that are useful across different kinds of employment opportunities. Totally different way of looking at what a career is all about. And I think we're going to go from careers managed by organizations increasingly to careers managed by individuals. Does that sound reasonable? Those of you who are sort of recent college grads, my guess is this is how you think. You know, it's not how my generation thinks, but this is how you guys have to think. And you have to think that way. You can't count on a company looking after you. And you can't count on people giving you the training or development or skills that you need. So it's a very different kind of thing. Now, since we're here talking to the BEnet group, I thought rather than my normal talk, which is what I do, is I really terrify corporations by sort of saying, here's how you're going to get in trouble and here's what you have to do to fix it. But I thought it would be kind of fun to flip it around. And let's take the case of an entrepreneur looking for an attractive area to disrupt and using the theories in the book to sort of think about how could you create a recipe for disruption. So step one, you want to find an attractive target. So here's my suggestion. You want to find the kind of companies that have had a long run of success, like Kodak, that are kind of asleep at the wheel, that are, not really on their toes. So in this particular example, I'm going to pick the payments business. The global payments business, which is dominated by these very large debit card and credit card players, is a huge, huge business. So you want a boss in charge of those business, as I said, who don't want any surprises, don't bring me bad news. You want bosses like that, because they're going to be not necessarily noticing what you're doing. And you want to look at ways that they are not serving their customers particularly well, So can you think about serving the same need, but with a twist, doing something a little different? Can you think about making what they do unnecessary? Why do we need those people? I can get you the same result without even involving them. Can you think about doing the same thing, but at a fraction of the price, because you've got a really novel way of doing it? A customer need that's not being met is being met in a bad way, or is being met in a way that's kind of infuriating? Or could you think of a way customers could reward you for making their experience just that much better? So those are the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself. So if you think about payments, who is badly, badly served by the payments industry? And I'm going to argue it's small shopkeepers. Here's a woman who runs a bookstore down in Greenwich Village. It's a family-owned business. She's been running the store for decades. But every time a customer uses one of those payment cards in her shop, she has to pay what's called an interchange fee. And interchange fees eat hugely into the profits of small businesses like this. We don't pay them as consumers, but the customers for these cards, they're actually not customers, they're hostages. If they want to accept a card, they have to pay the interchange fee. It's a very interesting dynamic. And these interchange fees really add up. So this was the latest graph I could find. As of 2008, interchange fees from merchants was a $45.3 billion business. I read a report last year that showed it's gone up to $55 billion because we're not using cash anymore. All of us are putting everything from coffee to potato chips on our debit cards, right? What we don't realize is that's having a huge negative impact on the merchants we do business with because of the existence of these interchange fees. So here's my argument for an entrepreneurial opportunity. These are providers who are really infuriating the quote customers that they make their revenue from. And it's a big, big attractive pot of money, and it's been a business that's been incredibly stable for a really long period of time. Now, so you got the opportunity. Now what you'll need is a business model, a very practical tool for doing business models rather than these endless spreadsheets and statements and stuff like that. There's a wonderful technique that I really recommend entrepreneurs use called the business model canvas. It's one page. And it says basically, before you can get even into a detailed business plan, create a canvas, which is your business in a nutshell. Who are the key partners? What are the key activities? What are the key resources? Where do you add value? What customer relationships do you have to have? What channels are you going to use? What are your customer segments? What's your cost structure? What are your revenue streams? But don't overthink it in the beginning, right? Lay it out in a very kind of high level, straightforward manner, because it's going to change. It's going to change a lot before you hit on the final business. This was developed by a guy called Alexander Osterwalder. Those of you who are entrepreneurs will want to get a copy of his book. It's called Business Model Generation. And he has this cookbook for business models. Very useful, very simple, lots of easy to use tools. I can highly recommend it. Okay, so let's take an example of a company that's a potential disruptor. The company is called LevelUp. And here's what they do. They have an app which you put on your iPhone. It's called the LevelUp app. They've negotiated with merchants in city areas. So what they're trying to do is saturate particular neighborhoods with merchants who will accept payments by LevelUp. Here's the deal. You want to buy a cup of coffee or something. You pay with your phone using the LevelUp app. LevelUp holds that payment. So in effect, they extend to you the credit that would normally be processed through a transaction fee. And they do this for thousands of purchases all day long. At like 11:59 at night, they bundle all these transactions together and hit the interchange people once, hit the interchange banks once. They pay one fee for thousands of transactions. So they can cut a deal with the merchants where there's a revenue share on the part of the merchants. So the merchants know how much was charged on the LevelUp card. They get a piece of that action. LevelUp gets a piece of that action. They both incur half the cost of the interchange fee, the normal interchange fee business. It's a real business. There are many LevelUp vendors here in the Columbia area. They're also in Boston, and I think they started in Philadelphia now. They're going after this segment. They're going after payments in a big way. And I think it's an interesting business model. Now, will they be the ones that win? I don't know. There's a lot of people contesting payments right now. You know, there's Square, there's a lot of other payment on cards. But you know, you can predict that those interchange fees, those are not going to last because there's just too much pressure on the merchants to bring those costs down. Someone's going to innovate their way around it. So let me conclude by offering a thought. You know, is there any good news in all this? And I actually think there is. I think especially for entrepreneurs, there's great news in this. If incumbents can't lock you out, if having a strong position doesn't create a barrier to entry as much as it used to, there are going to be massive opportunities for new businesses, for new ventures, for trying new things. So I actually think for entrepreneurs, if you're prepared to have an entrepreneurial mindset, I think this is actually a great time to be participating. So with that, we have some time for questions, and then we have some social time. Yes, back here.
As for the LevelUp app, is there any kind of legal action that Visa or MasterCard can take to say you're siphoning off our revenue stream?
Well, their revenue stream isn't protected by law. I mean, they're using the interchange fees. They're just putting one great big giant transaction against them rather than lots of little ones. I don't think it's a legal problem. They haven't had a legal problem so far, let me put it that way. Now, I'm sure there are lawyers over at Visa and MasterCard and all those guys tearing their hair out trying to figure out how to beat this. My guess is they're not going to run into that kind of problem until they really get up to scale. Right now, they're just kind of in the fleas and gnats category. I think those guys are dismissing them right now, would be my guess. Yeah?
It would seem to me that your thesis has more applicability in a sector like tech than in one like energy or commodities or something like that. And I'm just wondering if you see any differences across sectors.
Sure. Well, tech obviously has been fast moving for a long time. And I used to think the same exact thing. And then 2 months ago, I got a call from a sometime client of mine, who's in the energy distribution business. Now, here's the business model. You invest in a great big energy production plant, which you feed with fuel or gasoline or aqua power or whatever. And then you send energy out across the grid. The government tells you how much money you're allowed to make. Your job is to run it reasonably efficiently and collect your checks. You know, it's a very stable business. They called me and they said, our business is going through massive change. I said, your business? They said, yeah, we've got solar. So what that means is instead of the grid going one way, we send energy out to you, all of a sudden there's energy coming back. We've got brand new kinds of battery technology, which means people are able to store energy for much more extended periods of time than used to be possible. We've got green. So now we're getting challenged on things like the use of coal. We've got smart grids. So their fear is that they're actually going to be reduced into simply being a backup facility for when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, and the batteries have run out of juice. And that's a far smaller opportunity than the one that they built their physical plant for. One of them actually told me, she said, we depreciate our physical plants over 60 years. Think about that. And now all of a sudden you've got this complete change in business model. So yeah, I think there are places where there's still a lot of stability, right? Heinz ketchup. Can you figure that out? Heinz ketchup. How does Heinz ketchup remain, you know, the dominant player for decades in ketchup? I'll just have to scratch my head at that one. But in a lot more industries, we're really seeing challenges. And mining is another one, right? As the cost of raw materials change and everything. And mining used to be, you found the mine, you mined it for 40 years, you're done. Now that's changing too. So I'm actually kind of surprised at the number of places where this dynamic seems to be popping up. Questions over here, back in the back.
What are your thoughts about companies like Google that have their employees spend 20% of their time just doing
Whatever.
research on areas that interest individual employees?
I think it's great if you can afford it. It's often called the 1,000 flowers theory of innovation. You know, just go off and see what you can come up with. Here's the problem: 1,000 flowers never yet made a tree. Google's got a lot of money. Google can afford it, and maybe they'll run across something. But you know, the analogy I would use is it's you know the old line about if you took an unlimited number of monkeys and put them in a room, eventually you'll end up with war and peace. You know, well, very few of us have the luxury of unlimited numbers of monkeys. Google's big problem is they have enormous difficulty getting these small, interesting, engineering-driven ideas into market. They have stuff that's in beta test forever. And a lot of the ideas that have come out of that, I mean, if you made a list of Google's failures, it's a very long list. I mean, Google Wave, Google Player was one of the recent ones. Their previous attempts at social networking never kind of worked. I mean, they just go on and on and on the list. Now we'll see. You know, they've got some interesting new things that they're doing. They're actually making physical radios. They've got this thing called Google X, which is they're kind of way out there, driverless cars and you know, Google Glass and stuff like that. Some of those may yield something very revolutionary. So we'll see, we'll see. As a general rule for most companies that aren't as wealthy as Google, I think you want to be a little bit more structured about your innovation. I think it's very resource intensive to do it that way. There's another question here? Yes.
In the new model, the individual focus career path,
Mhm.
what do you think business school comes into play?
Oh, that's going to be so interesting. All right, I won't shy from controversy here. I actually think I gave a talk at the AACSB Deans meeting, which is the accreditation body for deans. So imagine to yourself, here's Rita in a room with 450 business school deans, and the title of my talk is The Business Model for Business Schools, Cracks, showing its cracks. So here's what I think. I think there is still going to be a role for business school training for certain people at fairly elite and or well-known schools. But if I was the dean of like Northeastern State University Business School, I'd be really worried because they're not getting the return. At those middle tier schools, people are not getting the career advancement, they're not getting the bump up in promotions and promotability that they used to. And so I think we're going to see an awful lot of those schools shut down or significantly scale back their programs. They're going to turn into one-year programs, or they're going to turn into almost like vocational apprenticeships where they're working really closely with a local employer and they're basically teaching skills those employers would normally teach their employees themselves. An interesting example of this is a program in Georgia. It's called Fast Start, I believe, and they've worked very closely with Caterpillar. It's a state-funded program. Caterpillar's basically laid out what people would need to know if they wanted to become a welder, let's say, at Caterpillar. And then the state actually, through this organization called Fast Start, actually gives people those skills. So I think you're going to start to see more of that. I think a school like Columbia is going to be fine. I think Harvard's going to be fine. You're still going to get value in the networks and the training and those kinds of things, but I think that model has kind of grown too much. I think it's going to get pared back. The other thing I think you're going to start to see is in many fields, and this isn't just business school, you're going to see this in undergrad, you're going to see this in grad school, you're going to start to see accreditation at the level of the course. Now, what does that mean? If I can accredit you for the 5 or 6 things I as an employer really want you to know, why do I have to pay for your MBA? Why do I have to pay for your BA, right? If I want to hire a coder, is it worth it to me more to know that this person has risen to the top 100 of all the coders that took, the Stanford MOOC course in coding? If that's really what I want, then why wouldn't I just hire that person and skip all the falderall around the degree? The degree, we forget this, but the degree, yes, it's a mark of achievement. It's also a signal. Employers for years have used degrees from elite schools as a signal that this person was good. I used to joke at Columbia, I said, we accept like 1 out of 14 typically, so we're very selective. So they're really smart, they're leaders, they're active in their community, and they're very driven when they arrive at our doorstep. Our students are very type A. I mean, they really are. You think Barnard people are type A? Anyway, all we have to do is no damage for the 2 years that we have them, and when they leave us, they're still going to be smart, driven, type A, leaders-oriented people. So, I used to joke, if you really wanted to save money, you could just shut the place down once the admissions office had done its business. That was not very well received, as you can imagine. And I'm being a little cynical, but no, I think you will still see value in pockets of business school, but I think there are seriously big changes coming down the pike. Yeah.
Talk to us about professional services business, where the competitive advantage really is the relationship or the skills of the individual. Do you see that being as disruptive as some of the other industries inside?
I actually think relationships and skills are two things that are relatively enduring. I think, when all around you is chaotic, you're going to turn to the people you trust. You're going to turn to the people you know will come through for you. And so those tight networks of relationships, I think, are still going to be very powerful, especially for professional services firms. Now, a lot of the basic activities professional services firms perform have been bitterly commoditized. I mean, if you look at what companies like Cognizant and Infosys and SatDM are doing, I mean, they're really kind of industrializing a lot of what used to be fairly bespoke services and commoditizing them. So if you can find niches where your skills are unique, your relationships set you apart, you've got something really different that you're doing, I think you're going to be fine. But if you're, if you're saying, I'm just a really bright person and I can help you, I don't see much future in that. I think we've got time for maybe two more. Anybody wants to ask another question or comment? Yes.
I just have a question. You mentioned tours of duty in terms of the entrepreneurial career path. And my understanding from that argument is it's really about the employers embracing it. That kind of the employees have embraced it, whether formally or informally, for years. But it's about employers setting up a contract, really saying, hey, we'll do this project for 3 years and go from there. What is your thoughts on employers embracing it?
Well, some, if going back to consulting firms, some employers work that way already. So there are many firms that are organized around projects. So big defense contractors, consultancies like Accenture, it's very well understood in those firms that you're going to take an assignment, it's going to have a certain lifespan, and when that project is done or the assignment's over, you're going to roll off and you're going to go find something new. So I would say there are many places in our economy where that's already the case. Where I don't think we've seen it as much is in the more, I'll call them traditional hierarchical firms, so General Electric or companies like that. And what I think they're starting to do is realizing if they want to hang on to real talent, the best and the brightest, you have to be able to convince those people that by taking this job, I'm going to be more employable when it's done than I am now. By taking this assignment, I'm going to have more skills than I do now. And you're going to have to work a lot harder, I think, as an employer to make that workplace an attractive place for these really talented young people. And I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic because right now, I mean, I saw it on my book tour, you were having this pretty intense conversation between the kind of baby boom generation, which had a totally different logic. Their logic was you demonstrated loyalty to the firm, you did a lot of squat work, your first couple of years to sort of prove yourself, you worked very long hours, you were very dedicated, and then as you sort of earned it, you got to do more interesting stuff. I don't think younger people today are interested in that model at all. I think they want to be learning and earning, as they go. And if we want to hang on to them, we're going to have to be much more creative about making sure they have opportunities.
Just moving off of that point, it is sort of a precarious position though, because what you're saying is, you gain those skills and then you move on because you have those skills so you're more employable later. But it's a scary position to be in because that's predicated on the assumption that another career move is going to be available. But if there are all these people that are constantly shifting around, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, and I'm not making value judgments. I mean, what I'm trying to do is sort of say, I think we have a different landscape that we need to start to understand. I am very, very concerned about people that don't, not the people in this room. You guys are going to be fine. Seriously. You may be worried about whatever you're doing next, but honest to God, if the fact that you're in this room, you're going to be fine. But I worry about people like my friend's son who completed high school, did a couple of years of community college, kind of dropped out, doing odd jobs here and there. I mean, he's not particularly valuable to an employer at this point. And I don't really see a clear path to him becoming particularly valuable. What I'm hoping, and this may be my next research project, I don't know, because I think this is a huge problem. I think there are an awful lot of people who are kind of being left behind by this transient economy phenomenon. And we need to figure that out because it's not good for a society to be leaving huge chunks of people behind. I just don't think that's good. I think some of the answer may be in actually the way education's changing, becoming almost more democratic, more accessible to people. It is easier than ever if you're motivated to pick up new skills. Those MOOCs I was referring to, you can actually, if you're motivated, there are things you can do. So I'm kind of interested in thinking about what are the new models going to be. The metaphor I would use is you need to be thinking about organizations today a lot more like making a movie or running a political campaign, or putting on the Olympics, right? Where you bring together people with the right skills and you create something fabulous together, and then its time has come and gone, and then hopefully there's another project to go on. One reporter, it was kind of funny, she said to me, well, what does that have to say about people moving up in their careers? And my response was, no entrepreneur ever thinks about moving up in their career. They're already up, right? What they think about is building a business and becoming more responsible and adding more value and growing the business. They don't think about some hierarchical thing. It's a completely different value system, and I think that's where we're going to be moving more and more. So it's just about 8 now. I know we have wine and cheese and conversation to have, so let me close the formal part of my talk. Thank you very much, Jessica, for making this happen. It's great to be back at Barnard, and thank you all for coming. This is really fun.